How's it going, pre-cal? Today we talked about different ways to solve equations. We're dealing with quadratic equations. The first way we talked about was factoring. So it says solve the equation by factoring x squared minus 9x minus 22 equals 0. The thing I want you to keep in your mind, when you see factoring, I want you to think two parentheses. That's what this is talking about. How do we factor this into two parentheses? Well, basically it's like the FOIL method backwards. We have to figure out what goes in here. So these two terms will multiply to equal this. So x times x is x squared. So we know it's going to be x. Now next I want you to figure out your symbols. So it's going to be plus minus, minus plus, plus plus, minus minus. The way you figure that out is you look at this final term here. If that's negative, that means you're always, if it's ever negative, you're going to use opposite symbols. So in this case, you have a plus and a minus. If it's just 1x and 1x, if it were 2x and 2x, if these front terms are the same, then it doesn't matter which one gets the plus, which one gets the minus. So now, we need to figure out what factors of 22, so you have 1 times 22, or 2 and 11, which one has a difference of 9? Which obviously, the 2 and 11 have a difference of 9. Now, it does matter which number goes with which symbol, because we want a negative 9 as the difference of 2 and 11. So therefore, our 11 needs to be the negative. So we have negative 11 and a positive 2 make a negative 9. And this way, 2 times negative 11 is negative 22. But again, it says solve. That means we have to figure out what does x equal. Well, the shortcut way, basically, is once you have your two parentheses, just switch the symbol. So x equals negative 2, x equals positive 11. And those would be your two answers. So again, factor means two parentheses, alright? So on this homework assignment. So that's our first way of solving an equation, is by factoring. Now the next one we do is called solve by rooting. So therefore, solve by rooting. We're going to be rooting both sides of the equation. So the equation that we were given is 6x squared minus 30 equals 0. So it says solve by rooting. You want to get the x squared by itself, or the variable squared, whatever letter that may be. So we're going to move the 30 by adding. So you have 6x squared equals 30. Then you all know, divide by 6. You always have to divide, get that out before you square root this. So you get x squared is equal to 5. And finally, to get a square out, you root it. Root it up. So, lastly, if you ever take a square root of a variable, in this case, the other side, make it a positive negative. Okay? Now you can't take square root of 5, so you just leave it root 5. Because again, if you were to square this, positive root 5 times positive 5 is 5. Negative root 5 times negative root 5 is 5. So that's why we have the plus minus, okay? So again, plus minus. Alright, that's how we solve by rooting, okay? Now the third way. The third one we talked about was solve by completing the square. This is the one that's going to take the most amount of steps. So solve by completing the square. Okay? So the problem that we did in class was x squared minus 4x equals 12. When we complete the square, there's a few steps we want to take, the same exact steps each time. So the first thing is we're going to take this number right here. We're going to call that b, because if you were to do standard form, this invisible one is in the position of a, b. So we're going to cut that in half. So you negative 4 divided by 2, which gives you negative 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to square that as our second step. So we have negative 2 squared, which is 4. Okay? Our third step is we're going to add that to both sides of the equation. Because remember, you can add any value you want to an equation as long as you add the same amount on both sides. you can subtract the same amount on both sides, as long as you do the same thing on both sides. So we're just going to go ahead and add a 4 in here, so we can also add a 4 in here. Now what we're going to do for our fourth step is we're going to take these three terms and factor it down to 1 parenthesis squared. Because the whole reason we set this up is basically we're going to break it into 2 parentheses, but they're going to be the same, so we're just going to write it as 1 parenthesis squared. And this side will be 16. And the way we do that is just cut that b in half. So it gives us minus 2. So that's the normal setup for all of these. Now, we still need to solve. So we get rid of a square by rooting. Now we can't move that 2 yet because it's in the parentheses squared. So you got to get rid of the square first. So we root it. So we're left with x minus 2. And again, we took a square root of a variable. So this side has to be a positive negative. So plus minus 4. I'm going to bring it up here. We have x minus 2 equals positive negative 4. Okay? I just brought it up there. So now we need to get the x by itself, so we're going to add 2. But notice we have 2 different answers here. We have positive 2 plus 4, and we have positive 2 minus 4. Plus and minus. So you have 2 answers. Therefore, 2 plus 4 is 6. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So those 2 would be your answers. Again, completing the square, cut this term next to x to the first in half. Then we square it. Then we add it to both sides of the equation. And then we're going to take these 3 terms, write it as 1 parenthesis squared, get rid of the root, or get rid of the square by rooting it, and then move our last term over, add up the numbers. But like I said in class though, just for instance, if you were to get to this step and it said x minus 2 equals positive negative root 3, where you can't take a perfect, there is no whole number, that's the square root of 3. When you move this over, you can just write your answer as 2 plus or minus root 3. That would do as your answer as well. Again, if this doesn't have a perfect root, you can just leave it as the root. 2 plus or minus root 3. Alright? So that's how you complete the square. So, we have one more. Okay? Our very last one is solve each equation by using the quadratic formula. I'm curious on how many of you guys memorized that formula. Okay? The quadratic formula, that says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the question is, where do we get a, b, and c? Well, in order to find a, b, and c, our equation has to be in standard form, which, by the way, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So basically standard form is everything's on the left side, that's equal to 0. Or vice versa. As long as everything's on one side, 0 is on the other. So, for this problem we were given x squared minus 2x minus 1 equals 0. So, when you have to use the quadratic formula, you want to establish a, b, and c. So again, there's this invisible 1 here. A is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 2, c is equal to negative 1. Okay? So now let's plug in. So to find, notice this says negative b, but b is already negative. So you're plugging a negative into another negative. So it's going to be positive 2 plus or minus b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. Okay? We're almost done. So now you have 2 plus or minus 2 squared, or negative 2 squared, is 4. That becomes plus 4 over 2. Alright? And now that gives us 2 plus or minus the square root of 8 over 2. I'm running out of room here, so I'm going to have to erase this over here. Sorry about that. But now, 8 is not a perfect square, but we can actually break that down to simplify this. Because remember, 8 is the same thing as the square root of 4 times 2, in which you can actually take the square root of 4 and bring it out to the front. So now we have 2 plus or minus 2 root 2 over 2. And again, if you have a denominator that can reduce both of your numerator terms, you can go ahead and do that. So we're going to divide all those by 2. We end up with 1 plus or minus 1 root 2, or just root 2. And then your denominator is 1, so you don't technically have to put the 1. So our answer would be 1 plus or minus root 2. And that is how you solve by using the quadratic formula. Alright? Now there's something specific about the quadratic formula that we also talked about, and that's called the discriminant. Okay? The discriminant is this section right here. The b squared minus 4ac, b squared minus 4ac. This is what we call the discriminant. Okay? Now what's the point of a discriminant? The discriminant will tell us how many solutions there are. So not necessarily what the answer is, but are you going to get 2 answers? Or are you going to get 1 answer? Or are you going to get no answers? Okay? Because if you end up with a negative underneath a root, it doesn't work. Because you can't have a negative underneath a root. Unless you're dealing with complex numbers, which we're not right now. Okay? And what if it were 0? That would just go away. You're left with just 1 answer. So, we have b squared minus 4ac. If you work out the discriminant and it is greater than 0, that means you have 2 solutions to the problem. Okay, so if you have a positive number underneath that root, then you have 2 solutions. If it is less than 0, that doesn't work because you can't have a negative, so it's 0 solutions. And finally, if b squared minus 4ac, your discriminant is equal to 0, therefore you're left with 1 solution. Okay? So, let's do a problem that has to do with that. Okay? So I'm going to set up a problem for you. Let's get this out of here. Okay? So, we have here 4x squared minus x plus 2 equals 0. Alright? So again, this is A, this is B, this is C. So all we have to do is set up our discriminant, and it'll tell us how many solutions there are. Okay? Again, the directions would read how many solutions. Okay? So, we have b squared, so negative 1 squared minus 4 times a, which in this case is 4, times c, which is 2. Alright? So it gives us 1 minus 32, which is negative 31. Since it's a negative number, that tells us if our discriminant is less than 0, or if it's negative, there are 0 solutions. And that is how you figure out, that is how you use the discriminant to figure out how many solutions to the quadratic equation you have. Okay? So there will be no x values that actually work. Okay? 0 solutions. So I hope all that made sense. I know it went kind of fast with it, but this is a video, so you can always rewind it. So that's always a good thing, right? Yeah. All right. So I hope this helped. And if not, watch it over. If that still doesn't help, watch it again. I'm just kidding. You can come talk to me at school. So I hope you guys get it. If you have questions, ask me. I want you to do well. Anyways, hope you're having a good day. And I'm not even sure if you're going to watch this, but anyways, have a good one.